Thank you for joining us today, everybody. I'm really excited about this podcast because it involves a really important person when we talk about our magazine utility security. So way back when we had this idea and concept in mind of targeting a new audience, launching a new magazine, a third magazine at our small publishing company, and focusing on security, one of the most important person to help us in shaping and guiding the direction of this publication is joining us today. Jim Willis, who has a wealth of experience in the utility security sector, just much more knowledge that could even convey with a proper intro. So rather than me try to do it, I'm going to say, welcome, Jim. Thank you for joining us. And can you tell us, the listeners, a bit more about your background in utility security and a bit more about yourself?
Hi, Curtis. Glad to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and to our audience. Yeah, I know two things very well, and that's utility and security. And I started out after I got a stint in the Navy. I came back to South Georgia, and became a second generation lineman. Didn't take long to figure out that's a hard way of making a living, and you spend a lot of time out in the rain and stuff. So encouraged me and personally to get pursue an education. Got a degree in engineering. Became an engineer for utilities, worked transmission, distribution, utilities as engineer, then as manager. Moved on up over the years. International development work began in the early '90s with NRECA's international programs, and then I began to get more and more into the security element of it. And because you have to have there's security element in international development, and I began to see the tie between utilities and security and how they are related, and the need for focused infrastructure security. So for the last 30 something years, that has been my focus. Has been uh, infrastructure security and dealing with utilities on how to be more secure, how to protect their assets, and their assets include people, their facilities, infrastructure, and their data. And all four of those areas are key. Um, I started my own organization in the early 2000s, and as you said, to date, I think my son and I figured it up. I have worked in 43 different countries uh, to date, and I got
Wow.
uh, some more coming up. So we'll see where it goes, where it takes me.
A lot of ink on that passport. Geez, only
Yeah, I've had to have a few sheets added in from time to time.
wow, wow. So, just before we got on this podcast, I admit I was chatting with Jim and, he kind of expressed how busy things are right now. And, for good reason. Utilities are just facing a wealth of threats and they're growing more and more every day. It seems like they've become a bigger and bigger target to lots of bad actors and lots of bad people wanting and bad organizations and bad nations wanting to do bad things. So, Jim, let me just kind of throw this broad and general question out to you. With this threat surface growing so much, what do utility security professionals do to rise and meet that challenge? What kind of recommendations would you give them?
Well, first, understand that size does not matter. Threats, every utility are facing the same threats. The thing about the internet and the speed at which things can be communicated have now basically brought even the smallest utility into the realm of being a target. We have the idea that they only go after large targets. That goes back to what happened in the past up until, well, I think it's 2013 that the Metcalf attack in Southern California took place, where a terrorist attack bulk transmission substation. And the idea was that that was going to be what was going to take place is bulk transmission, bulk power, or bulk transfer of gas or water systems. But it's not. Since February or January of 2022, a manifesto showed up on the deep web talking about the better approach instead of focusing on trying to orchestrate an attack on large utilities is it only takes a couple of people and minimal effort to attack small and medium utilities and even remote ones. The more remote, the more likely you are to be a target now. And that began to manifest itself, like if you remember, North Carolina in 2022 had a substation attack that knocked out a large portion of the territory. Since then, it's just been one after the other after the other. There are hundreds have taken place, and several have taken place this last week. It's just we don't hear about them as much for very valid reason. We trying to cut down the number of copycats. But the idea that you're safe because of size is not true.
Mm. Okay. Yeah. 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 Definitely all those examples you illustrated, and just kind of seeing the pervasive way that internet is shared on the bad information is shared out on the in the internet, and how easy it is to take that and run with it if you're a bad actor is pretty concerning. You mentioned at the start of this that you've worked with utilities and security professionals in this country, all over this country and all over the world. As you go in and help consult and guide utilities on how to make their environments and their facilities more secure, what is often the biggest mistakes you see them making when you walk in the door?
Assumptions. In fact, if you remember the very first article I wrote for the new magazine was about making assumptions. We tend to make assumptions that the world that has existed in the past is the world we live in now, and it is not so. It is changing rapidly. We also have, and that permeates from the very top of the organization down to the lower levels. The utilities that the people that have spent 20, 30 years or more in the utility industry don't understand the changing environment. We make assumptions that, well, that law enforcement or some other uh, security person or someone who claims some security expertise actually knows what they're talking about. And the idea of leaving it to some expert can't, well, just look what happened to Trump during the election. I don't care if you like him or don't like him, but the fact there were two attempts on him, and the idea that the very first attempt in Pennsylvania could get that, the assailant could get that close, proves that we can't depend on others to provide the security needs that we have. You need to understand that we can't assume that things are handled. We have to verify it for ourselves. We have to vet the, if you're bringing in a consultant, vet that consultant, whether there's me or someone else. Make sure they do know what they're talking about. If your local law enforcement, you've you've heard me say this before, law enforcement and security aren't necessarily the same thing. Saying this that a law enforcement officer is a security expert is like saying this that everyone that in the Air Force is a pilot. It just doesn't work that way. Yes, they have some element of it, but they don't, have the expertise. Just like every law enforcement officer isn't a detective or isn't a SWAT officer. There's different things in different levels, and to make the assumption that one equates to the other or that things are being handled by others is a significant vulnerability.
Turning to a new topic here, because this is kind of how we met and linked up initially, which is talking about security as it relates to the workers who are out in the field working out in the public facing spaces. Specifically, though, there's a tremendous amount of dangers they face from just violent conflicts that could happen with angry customers or with just violent people in general. All the way down, a utility worker trampling on a bush accidentally when they're trying to go do the work they need to do, or having to dig up a yard and creating escalated individuals. With all that said, you have such a wealth of expertise in this area and how to guide folks to respond better and handle potential violent, potentially violent conflicts or violent situations. Can you talk more about what utilities ought to be doing to make sure their workers are better prepared to handle situations out in the field where people may be threatening?
Yeah, we can. The person that is at your utility, whether you have a full-fledged security um, a staff, or if it's been an assignment handed to the safety person or someone else with a dozen other responsibilities and hats they're having to wear. There's two areas you need to focus on to try to begin to enhance security at your organization. First, you need to make sure you get buy-in by the higher ups, the staff, all the way to the executive officers. You need to make sure they understand the importance of it, and that they set a gold standard for security stance. Then you need to focus on training, and training for field officers and field employees and for office employees needs to focus on. I used to say three, but there's actually four elements: three primary, and then a fourth of security skills that you need. And you need these skills to match your technical skills. You need to be as good at these four security skills as you are your technical job. And that is awareness, de-escalation, response. The fourth one I've thrown in there more and more in the last 18 months or so is be able to critical thinking, be able to think under duress, to be able to get off the X, or avoid the deer in the headlights situation. But utilities, we face very unique situations. When we're in the field, we're on other people's property. We're in their neighborhoods. They have all the resources we don't. So make sure that the training that you provide actually fits the particular needs. For de-escalation, for example, the training that de-escalation training that works in a school will not work for utility workers. Those that work in hospitals have to be really adjusted to fit our needs. The de-escalation training that law enforcement gets is different than what we do. The reason being is law enforcement de-escalation training is called is meant to compel compliance. It's a tactical de-escalation. When a law enforcement officer gets involved with de-escalation, if it doesn't go their way, sooner or later it's going to go the way they need it to go. Even if they can't de-escalate the situation, they will ramp it up to the next session. They bring up other tools and they have the authority to do other things. We don't have those authorities. We have to depend specifically on defensive de-escalation. So you need to make sure that the training that you do provide, one is to recognize you need to do the training, get buy-in from the higher ups, and get buy-in by the people you're going to be trained, but then make sure that the trainer that you bring on board actually knows the unique issues that you face. Office employees, they also face unique issues, whether it's a municipal, a co-op, or an investor-owned utility. All of them have unique issues they're facing, and that the training needs to address those specific issues.
Okay, yeah, yeah, definitely. It's definitely one of those areas that, I think when you say security initially, you don't think of that being an issue, but I mean, the headlines say otherwise, and the fact that every utility worker I talk to has expressed some sort of incident involving knives or guns drawn on them. It's a scary situation, and the right training goes a long way. I want to turn to a another hot pressing topic for utilities. It's been one for quite some time, and you kind of referenced it earlier in this podcast, which is substations being targeted for attack. Those numbers are going up. Like you said, they're not always in the media spotlight, but the numbers are growing. The one thing I've learned as we've launched this magazine is it's an exceptionally complicated problem to solve. The idea of guarding, substations in a way that's impactful, given just the landscapes and the places and spaces they're in are so diverse. How do you effectively do it with a reasonable budget? So what solutions do you feel are most effective at protecting substations?
You're right. It is a very complicated and complex issue. There are thousands and thousands of substations, and one size does not fit all. And the problem we're facing is that there are infinite number of threats. There are infinite threats. We have limited resources, but we have to try to get it right 100% of the time. The assailant only has to get it right once. And so what they're with things such as this, I mentioned the January 22 manifesto that came out. On the dark web, almost weekly, another item about that comes out. They're really pushing the idea of basically guerrilla warfare against utilities. It's the same thing when I worked overseas in a lot of places, Afghanistan, some of the other conflict areas I've worked in, the things we saw there that, attack, where you can get in, get out, and not be caught. That's the same tactics they're using now. The thing is, again, one size does not fit all. There's so many variables that fall into place. You have to do an on-site assessment. You need to bring someone in, get other eyes on it. DHS has people that will come in and do a survey for you. Understand they make sure that you get other people to look at it as well. Not everyone that works for the federal government, not everyone that claims to be a security consultant, again, is an expert in the particular issues. You've got to look at things such as geography. Where is it located? Is it hilly? Is it flat? What does it serve? What is the criticalness of that particular station? There are so many variables that go into it that you need to have spend a little resources and getting someone to look at it and come up with practical and pragmatic approaches to solving the problem. Vendors is a big issue. Vendors can be some of the greatest resources of information possible. But like my son says a lot, when you sell a hammer, every problem's a nail. Their whatever their solution is the solution. You know, it may or may not be. You need to make sure you understand what the problem is and what exact vulnerability you're trying to solve before you bring in a vendor. Then once you have that decision, once you know what product you want to use, then their expertise is invaluable. I mean, their training, their knowledge of their product, but don't depend on them to know immediately what you need. I work with a lot of vendors, there are a lot of great people out there, but if you provide ballistic wall material, then what you want to do is you want to put up a ballistic wall. I mean, that's which is great, but you can go broke putting that up. It's right in the right place. It is very important. When it's not, it's a waste of money, and you haven't solved the problem. So you make sure the biggest thing is get eyes on your system. Find your vulnerabilities, not just substations, but other critical areas as well. Remember, there are 4 areas of security. Data, which is what we typically in utilities, when you talk about security, we think data. That's where everybody goes. We've got facilities, we got personnel, and then we got infrastructure. And infrastructure is substations. Yes, that's basically our heart, but that's not the only part of the entire system. There are other vulnerabilities that need to be considered as well.
Yeah, and a great way to transition to my next question. But before I do, I want to kind of shamelessly plug Utility Security Magazine and let all our listeners know that if you haven't already been reading the magazine since we launched last year, Jim Willis has been providing outstanding feature articles talking all about substation security, and I highly recommend you go and take a look and read those if you have not already, along with some awesome and outstanding columns too. So if you haven't read our 2024 issues, go to utilitysecurity.com, get your free subscription there to do that. So I mentioned transition, having to cover other events and to consider other events or other locations, other properties and facilities, keeping them secure. Obviously, one thing that's been a headline for many years and has been an issue is mass shooting events, and those happening in office buildings and facilities that utilities might own similar facilities to those. So, in that threat landscape, what are some best practices you feel utilities should be doing to be better prepared for a mass shooting event, whether it's insider threat or coming from the outside?
Well, again, this is a complex issue and a complex problem, and a lot of people go at it the wrong way. There's a lot of times there's 2 different schools of thought. One is ignore it, it'll go away. Basically, bury your head in the sand. The other is let's go full bore, let's do drills, let's really get at it, and that can be a problem too. Back around 600 BC, I believe it was, Greek philosopher named Achilles made a statement that we don't rise to our level of expectations, we fall to our level of training. Of course, that's an Americanized version of it, but it's absolutely true. What we have seen over and over, if you do not train your employees to respond to violence, whether it's someone threatening with some type of bludgeon or knife or gunfire, they will not respond. They will basically just freeze, or they will not make good choices. Now, the problem is, how do you train? Again, you have to be very, very careful with your training. You need to train I'm not, you need to train those that are enthusiastic about doing this type training, about doing active shooter training. You also have to train those that do not want to be involved, but they still need to know it. So you have to try to train both groups. And it can be so easy to focus on one to the detriment of the other. But we've got to train everyone. And I tell people, make sure you start off your training in the right way. Make sure that you turn around and don't get too aggressive, too gratuitous up front, too stressful up front. Build to the right level of stress, but only the right level of stress. I'm not a big fan of drills until they're done right. If you were to say, Curtis, you were a utility employee and you want me to come into your utility and let's do a drill, I'd try to push you off about a year. And I'd want to do some training up front, get the people used to the idea before we actually jumped into a drill, because done wrong, it can do as much harm or than no training at all. And more than a few, there's an issue that took place a few years back, not far from where I live here uh, on the East Coast. I'm not going to go deeper into that. You can probably figure out what I'm talking about. But where a safety worker came in, he had a great background. He was an ex-Marine officer. He was worked Department of Homeland Security. They came in and brought him in, has a utility, brought him into a mid-sized utility, has their security officer. He wanted to do active shooter training. And he and I had done some work before. He's a friend of mine, still is. And it's right before Thanksgiving. That's back well before COVID. And he said, well, I'm going to do this. And I said, well, make sure you temper it. Make sure, he said, you do it in the right manner, be a little careful how you go about it. He said, I've done it several times. I know how to do it. I said, yeah, but you got to remember, these aren't Marines. Anyway, he went ahead and did it. I've offered my help. He said, no, I've got it. So I went on my merry way. He did it just about a week before Thanksgiving that year. About 10 days after Thanksgiving, he had lost his job. He had done it there's so much pushback against the way he did it that he actually lost his job over it. You have to be careful how you do the training. And scaring people isn't training them. That's a big issue. But on the flip side, you need to train them. They need to know how to recognize a threat is taking place, that danger is happening. They need to respond to it effectively.
Well, outstanding answer, outstanding answer. We're kind of near the end here. I always kind of end most interviews with what I call a crystal ball question, which is kind of, you could look into the future over the next 5, 10 years at the utility security landscape. Where do you see changes happening? Where are new threats emerging? What do utility security professionals need to be planning for today that might be striking them tomorrow that they're not seeing?
Well, understand the landscape just like the battlefield landscape. One of the biggest changes of the battlefield landscape is $100 drone. The same thing for us. One of the biggest issues we're going to face will be more and more use of drones for surveillance, for attack. We also see a change in perception. Utilities, at least less than a generation back, were looked at as benevolent providers of service. Now we're seen as adversaries. Now we're seen as malevolent entities that destroy the environment, that that are resisting change, that are doing, belching coal smoke into the air. There, we have to realize that there will continue to be a change in the public perception. There will be evolving issues. AI is a good thing, and it's also a bad thing. I like the third law of Newtonian mechanics. For every action, there's an equal opposite reaction. For every good thing, there's a bad thing. The idea that AI will be used as a tool against us, absolutely true. The idea that drones will be used as a tool against us, absolutely true. On the other hand, drones make great inspection tools. I mean, there's a good and a bad for everything. We just have to be ready and prepared for it and realize we need to make sure our our all of our staff, inside, outside, executives, everyone, warehouse people, everyone has the security skills to match their technical skills. Until we get to that point, we will always be hurting. Now, we're about where we were with security as far as utilities go, where we were at in the 70s and 80s with safety. We knew it was an issue, we just didn't know how to handle it. Now, basically, it's built into part of the job. We've got to get the same way with security.
Fantastic insights, Jim. Really appreciate you taking time to join us for this podcast today. Lastly, before we leave, can you tell folks about your organization, how they can reach you if they want to connect?
All right. Well, of course, I'm the CEO of Indev Tactical. We're a consulting and training organization. Our primary focus is utilities. I do have other clients, but primarily 80, I would say 80, about 90% of my work for the last several years has strictly been utilities. Um, you can reach out and contact me directly at jim.willis, jim.willis at indevtactical.net, INDEV TACTICAL.net. Or call me at 703-623-6819. I don't have a problem taking a call. I'll answer it. And I'll give you a truthful answer. I either know it or don't know it, whatever your question is. But again, 703-623-6819.
Thanks so much, Jim. I really appreciate your time today, and thank you all for plugging in and listening to our podcast today. Stay safe and secure out there, everybody.